Hello, Adi. Thanks for joining us. This is Chris P with Rush Coach Development webinar today. We are joined by Alex Twitchen, all the way from England. Alex, thanks for joining us. Please share your story with us and give us your journey.
My journey, my story. So it's been a bit of a meandering journey. I wouldn't say in any way that it was planned. It's just kind of like happened. So I started coaching when I was fairly young. I was my first year at university. I played soccer. I wasn't a particularly great player, but I enjoyed playing. And the university that I was at just happened to be running an FA coaching course. It was the week before we went back for the spring term. And I just thought that's kind of interesting. I'm not doing anything that week. So I signed up for it. It was a cold, icy, snowy January. But I really enjoyed it. Just kind of made me reflect and think about the game in a way that I hadn't done so beforehand. And the tutor that we had was really, really knowledgeable, really skilled in the way that he kind of delivered the course. So it kind of just fired my enthusiasm for coaching. And then I kind of didn't do much with the qualification until a friend of mine, she played football, and she captained the women's team. And she wanted to take things a little bit more seriously, so she asked me if I'd coach the women's team. So I did that for 2 years, and then kind of at the same time I was fortunate that I lived close to one of our national sports centres, and they used to run a lot of FA Fun Weeks, and I got to know the guy who organised those, and he was always on the lookout for coaches, so I started working for him. So over a period of about 3 years, I had some really good experiences in terms of working on your typical kind of holiday children's coaching camps, and then coaching the women's team at university. When I left university, I did a summer working out in the States at Long Island with two people who I have a lot of time for and a lot of respect for, and still kind of keep in touch. That's Gary Book and Tim Bradbury, and I think they're both still involved in various things at this moment in time. And after I came back from the States, I kind of started to, studying to be an accountant, but after about a year that didn't really work out. So I became like a self-employed football coach and organised children's after school clubs. I organised holiday camps. I kind of lived in a place called High Wycombe, and the local football team there were on the rise. They were on the up. They had appointed Martin O'Neill, who ex Nottingham Forest. He was the club's first full-time manager. They had a little community scheme. Martin was kind of supposed to run that, but he kind of wanted to focus a little bit more on managing the team. So the club asked me to take that on, which was, again, another really good experience of running a community scheme on behalf of a club. And then I kind of started working part-time at my local college, delivering courses for 16 to 19-year-olds. And just kind of went back to university, did a master's, and then I kind of got a job at Chichester, which is a small university down on the south coast. And that was back in 1995, and since then I've just done all kinds of things really related to football. I kind of coached the university team. We had quite a decent side, played in the National University Championship, did quite well in a couple of years. Started tutoring for the FA, so did a lot of FA Level 1, FA Level 2, UEFA B license courses as an instructor. So I found that was a really interesting experience in terms of not only developing my tutoring skills, but also developing myself as a coach. When you've got to deliver something to other coaches, it kind of makes you think and reflect on your own coaching. And I kind of did a year as technical director for the Girls Centre of Excellence at Brighton, worked in the sort of boys academy at Bournemouth, running a talent development centre, managed a semi-professional team for 2 years, and then for the last 3 years I've been working down at Portsmouth in their academy, running or coaching the under-13 team, so 2006, 2007s at the moment. So that's quite nice. They're a really nice bunch of lads. I really enjoy the coaching that I do with them. So it's been a journey which has had no how can I say, no plan. I've just kind of looked at opportunities as they've come along and got involved. But when I look back, it kind of makes sense, and it's kind of given me a bit of a broad range of skills, I think, both across, you know, my actual coaching and then the kind of coach learning and coach development space as well.
Brilliant. What a rich history there. You know, getting thrown in your, was it your first year of college or your last year of college into the FA? The FA prelim.
The FA prelim was my first year. Yeah, my
Yeah,
first
first year.
term. Yeah.
And who was your instructor, Alex?
He was a guy called Alf Coulter, who at the time was regional coach for the East Midlands. So the regional coaches had a part of their remit was to deliver prelims. And yeah, so it was the first week in January. Like I say, it was cold, it was icy, it was snowing. We had to go on the AstroTurf. I managed to sprain my ankle crossing a bull. So for the last 2 days of the course, I was hobbling around. But Alf was brilliant. And actually, after I left university and started working as a self-employed coach back home, I bumped into Alf again because he left the FA and he was now managing a semi-pro club close by. So I got to know Alf in a kind of different capacity a few years later. But yeah, like I say, it really fired my enthusiasm for coaching, because it just kind of, at that point, I hadn't really thought about what I was doing as a player. You know, I just kind of played. But that was a kind of an insight into, well, actually, there's a lot more to this game than you think. And actually trying to coach people is a lot more challenging than you think.
Yeah. So just obviously, Alf was a big influence, right? You talk about a cold January in England, and then doing a coaching course and then hurting your ankle. But just wondering, like, the impression that Alf made on you to obviously continue and get about that, and then travel, you know, to come to the States with Gary and Tim Bradbury. Tim is still involved. Tim is a USSF instructor, and we talk regularly. He just sent me an article actually on different learning styles and things and sessions. But just, you know, look, there's so many things to unpick, and we didn't even touch what you're doing right now with Open University yet.
True.
So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I spent best part of 22 years working at Chichester. It's a typical small university, face-to-face. We have about 5,000 students. I taught on a range of courses there, sport development, sports coaching, and then over the last sort of 6 years that I was there, we developed a football coaching and performance degree, which was, I was kind of always reluctant to set up a highly specialized football degree, because I just felt that it was a bit too narrow, and I wasn't quite sure what kind of student we would attract. But I was kind of finally persuaded by my colleagues to develop this program, and it's been really successful. It's thriving. I occasionally pop back and see my colleagues and maybe do the odd guest lecture now. But we've had some good students that have gone on to do other things in the game. So working at, you know, some of our local professional clubs like Brighton, Bournemouth, Southampton, some a little bit further afield. But I kind of got to the point, I guess, when you spend 22, 23 years at the same institution, you feel as though you need to kind of stretch yourself, challenge yourself, and maybe go and do something a little bit different. And I'd been an external examiner at the Open University, so I was kind of aware of the approach that they took, and obviously everything is online, it's distance learning, and it kind of quite intrigued me. So a position came up and I applied and kind of got the job. So I've been at the OU now for a couple of years, and it's a vastly different organization to the one that I was at previously. So whereas Chichester had 5,000 students, at the Open University we have around about 150,000 students. Everything is delivered online, so we don't have any kind of face-to-face teaching. My role is to kind of write content, write material, and produce the modules. So I don't have any direct contact with our students. I don't do any kind of tutoring in that respect. So for me, it's and I still think I'm making the transition. If I'm honest, I'm still kind of finding my feet because it's such a vast organization. But yeah, kind of a huge transition going from standing up in front of a group of students for 16, 17 hours a week to kind of mostly working from home and writing and producing content and occasionally filming things and just putting it all together into an online course.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I do at the moment, along with my role down at Portsmouth, and I also still do a bit of tutoring for the FA and some mentoring for the FA as well. So it all kind of dovetails together quite nicely.
Yeah, and I can guess in current times, Alex, that
Yeah.
the distance learning and online stuff is going to become even bigger and even more with
Yeah.
the current situation, obviously, that
Mhm.
So you were part of developing a course, and it was coaching others to coach
Yep, that's right.
course, right? Do you want to talk a little bit about that and
Yeah.
how that came about?
Okay, so I kind of know a chap called Stuart Armstrong. So Stuart is head of coaching at Sport England. I think perhaps some of you might be familiar with Stuart because he runs a quite popular podcast called The Talent Equation. Ditch those drills. Uh, so Stuart and myself have known each other for a few years, and we kind of reached out to Stuart and for a conversation around, is there anything we can do to support the new coaching plan, which they launched, because there were elements in there around developing distance learning, possibly remote mentoring, and things like that. One of my, I wouldn't necessarily call it a passion. One of my insights, let's say, was that there's not a lot of support for the people that support other coaches. Whether you be a tutor, whether you're a mentor, an instructor, a coach developer, a coach educator, whatever kind of terminology we use, there's not, or I didn't feel there's that much support that those kind of people could get. And so we kind of put a proposal to Stuart to develop a course which wasn't aimed at coaches as such, but was aimed at developing the people who develop coaches, coaching others to coach. And how could they develop their skills? How could they support coaches better, and so forth? And it was kind of uncharted territory in my view. Stuart, bless him, took a punt. He gave us a grant, and we developed that program on what is known as the Open University's Open Learn platform. So it's free learning. It's part of our Royal Charter. As an open university, we have to provide a certain amount of our curriculum freely accessible to anyone. So we kind of put it on the Open Learn platform as opposed to putting it on a more commercial paywalled kind of site, because we wanted to get as many people as possible to access the course. And that's kind of like my first big project that I developed for the OU, really. And I really enjoyed it because it made me think a lot about my role as a tutor, a lot about my role as a mentor. And it's a very interesting area at the moment because I think it's one that's attracting a little bit more interest from a research point of view. And I think it's also an area that's attracting a little bit more interest from a more practical, pragmatic point of view. Here in the UK, for example, we're having a bit of a debate about the terminology, particularly between, say, coach developer, coach educator, tutor, mentor, instructor. What do we mean by all those different terms? I know the ICCE, the International Council for Coaching Excellence, have a definition of coach developer as a kind of all-encompassing umbrella term that embraces all those kinds of different roles. There's a little bit of school of thought, I think, in the UK that a coach developer has a little bit of a narrower definition in terms of being someone that works with perhaps more experienced coaches, less of a teacher, less of an educator in a sense, less about building a coach's knowledge base, more about taking experienced coaches who have that knowledge base and perhaps challenging them to think about how they're applying that knowledge in a different way, giving them a different perspective, a different lens to kind of see their coaching through. So yeah, it was a fascinating project. It's gone down really well. We've had just over 2,000 people register on the course since last July. We've had some really nice feedback. I've used it in some blended learning approaches. So for example, I'm just in the middle of a project with England Boxing, where they've taken 4 of their national coaches, and each one of those national coaches are going to mentor 4 other performance coaches. So we got each of the national coaches to just take 2 of the sessions in the course, 2 sessions each. So between them, they covered all 8 sessions. And then we met in Sheffield about a month ago now, a bit longer. And each one of the national coaches presented. It was only supposed to be 20 minutes, but they kind of went on for about 40 minutes each. But they presented back to the rest of us the 2 sessions that they'd looked at. So it was a really good way of sharing the learning, sharing all 8 sessions across the 4 of them. And then, yeah, it's giving them a little bit of support. And we're also looking at another project, excuse me, with a sports charity called Street Games, who really work with disadvantaged young people, use sport as a way of kind of trying to encourage them back into education and training. And they have a group of national tutors, and the national tutors are hopefully studying the Coaching Others to Coach course. And I kind of talked to them and interviewed them before they enrolled on the course, and the idea is then to interview them after the course to see whether the course has had any impact or influence on their tutoring, on their delivery. So for me, that's going to be quite an interesting kind of insight research project to see whether the course does have an impact on what a typical coach developer, coach educator, tutor does. Because we kind of put these courses on our platform and they're there and people access them. There is a forum function, but we never really know what impact or influence they've actually had. So to try and get a little bit of evidence would be good. Yeah, so it's freely available. You can go to the Open Learn platform, Coaching Others to Coach. You don't need to pay anything. You just need to create an Open University account so that you can access all the content and all the features. I really like our Open Learn platform because it's not like a MOOC where you have to study the course in a certain time period and you have to study it sequentially in a linear kind of way. So you can just go, you can just access it whenever you want. There's no time limit. You can go straight to session 8 if that's the kind of session that you're interested in. You can just kind of navigate your way through it however you like. There are some quizzes in there, and if you actually complete the whole course and you do a couple of the quizzes, you can get a digital badge. And we know from some research in other areas that people actually like acquiring these digital badges. They kind of add them to their CVs, as it were. It's not certificated, it's not an Open University qualification as such. It's kind of an attainment badge, really. But they seem to be quite popular in terms of the way people collect these kind of digital badges.
Yeah, brilliant.
Maybe worth checking out.
Yeah, absolutely, it is worth checking out. I've actually done the course, and there's another person on, Juan Gonzalez Mendia from South America Coaching.
Hello, Juan.
Yeah, he says, I've done the course. When I saw how many hours it would take, I thought about, really? By the time he was done, he said he couldn't believe how fast the time went, and he goes back as a regular coach developer and uses that stuff. So you've got my testimony and you've got Juan's testimony on the course, and the feedback was, I loved it. I did it before I did my American B license, and the thing that stood out to me was the imbalance of power with instructors, right? And I did my C license many years ago, came away from the federation because of a terrible experience with an instructor, and then going back, there was still that imbalance of power, but it wasn't flexed upon all the time. So this is a question from Juan as well. He says, what's the best bit, the most challenging, and how do you do learning and development?
What, in terms of at the OU?
For
Or
you, I think he's talking for you. What is the best bit for you? What is the most challenging, and how do you do your learning and development?
okay,
And that's directly to you, not for the Open University.
okay. So for me, let me take the last one first. How do I do my learning and development? So, I mean, I did my FA full badge back in 1994, and then I converted that to the UEFA A license back in 1998. So the best part of 22 years ago. That was the last time. I suppose I've done the youth modules since then, but let's say I've kind of exhausted the FA's formal coach education structure many, many years ago. So for me at the moment, the way I learn and develop is probably twofold. I like listening to podcasts. I like kind of doing quite a bit of reading. But what I also find is I have a really good group of friends and colleagues around me that I learn a lot from. Now, when I was at Chichester, looking back now, I think we had such a good community of practice, if that's what you want to call it. And we always shared ideas. We were really supportive. We all had slightly different experiences in soccer, which was great because then we had, kind of different experiences to draw on. So Dabo was coaching at quite a high level semi-pro club. Perry was coaching a Portsmouth women's team in the FA's National League. Danny was kind of finding his feet in terms of tutoring with the FA and what have you. And we had Duncan, who was previously a professional player, just making the transition from playing into coaching. So we all had slightly different experiences, but we all just gelled together really well. So a lot of my learning and development came from that little community. What I'm not sure if I appreciated it at the time, but having gone down to Portsmouth now, different group of people, different experiences, and we've got one person down there particularly who's our head of coaching and learning, which is Sean O'Driscoll. And Sean's got a really good reputation in the game as a kind of innovative thinker. He's managed various professional clubs, Bournemouth, Doncaster. He coached the England under 19, and he was also the assistant at Liverpool with Brendan Rodgers for just under a year. And Sean's got a lovely manner about him in which he's quite honest, he's quite direct, and you can say something and he'll go like, well, why would you do that? And you think, yeah, why would I do that? So I've kind of found someone who challenges me, pushes back, and I think you really need that. My little group at Chichester possibly almost became like an echo chamber. And so I guess the point I'm making in terms of learning and development is that I think you need to find trusted colleagues you can share things with, but you also need to find people that you trust and respect who will give you a different perspective and push back a little bit and challenge you. So, for the last year working with Sean at Portsmouth has really made me think about my coaching, and he's got a very different approach. One will be more than familiar with this person. So we have Mark Bennett working with us on a kind of limited approach, I would say. But we're kind of trying to incorporate a lot of Mark's ideas into our coaching program at Portsmouth, taking a kind of behavioural approach. And so I'm kind of dripping all that kind of stuff into my coaching and playing with it and experimenting with it. I did one of Mark's master classes, went and saw Alan Keane at Reading coach. And so I'm just kind of trying to develop myself, push myself and learn and continue to develop. Most challenging aspect, I think for me, it's aligning the different aspects of knowledge that you need to have as a coach. So you try and immerse yourself in the technical and the tactical aspects, but equally it's about understanding how you build the relationships with your players, how you're self-aware, how you understand yourself, your values, and all that kind of thing. And so kind of aligning and linking and connecting those different parts of the knowledge that you need to have to be an effective coach is quite challenging. I'm a Spurs supporter. I'm not a season ticket holder, but I kind of go and watch them about four or five times a year. And I take a little book with me and I sit in the stand and I kind of analyze the game. And that's my kind of technical and tactical workshop, watching Spurs or not. Maybe I'll watch the other team. I went to the Leipzig game, what was that, not so long ago, and spent more time analysing Leipzig than I did analysing Spurs because they were far more impressive than Tottenham. But I call that my little kind of tactical workshop, going to watch Tottenham. And you sit next to a Tottenham supporter and you've got your little book there, and occasionally, eventually they say, what are you doing then? I say, I'm just like analysing the game. You strike up a conversation and say you have a bit of a social as well. And we have a right good moan about how poor Spurs have been this year. Yeah, so I probably gone on far too long there, but
no, not at all, not at all. I think there's a lot of things to unpick, obviously, with just surrounding yourself with friends and colleagues, someone who can give you good and honest feedback. Just self-reflecting too, though. I think as coaches and coach developers, we go through, and there's moments we've done a session and we're reflecting on our own session, and I think we can be quite harsh to ourselves. And I think the best advice there might be, talk to yourself as if you would talk to another coach, right?
yeah, exactly.
But carry on, Alex.
Well, I was going to say, in terms of the kind of mentoring and coach development work that I've done, I think helping writing the Coaching Others to Coach course had a massive impact on the way that I approach my tutoring and mentoring. So on the FA's mentoring program, which I started 5 years ago, I would say that I've almost radically changed my approach now to how I work with mentors. It's far more. Okay. So the biggest change is I kind of think I started that mentoring program thinking that they needed my knowledge, they needed my support, and I felt as though I wasn't doing my job unless I wasn't delivering some kind of content to them. Whether that was taking a session or whatever. Now I would say I've flipped that on its head, and I spend more time getting to know them, more time understanding them. I offer them a range of things that they can get from me, and I allow them to choose what they want. So, for example, they can come and watch me coach, and then we'll follow that up with a conversation, and they'll ask me why I did this, why I did that. So I literally had a Skype conversation earlier this week with one of my mentees who came down to watch me coach, probably the last session we did before we were shut down, which was 2 weeks ago. I'm happy to go and watch them coach, although we kind of put a caveat on that being watched by your mentor can be quite stressful and you can feel under pressure, so don't feel any compunction to do that. We can just meet on Skype and chat through things. They can send me session plans and I can comment on that. So it's having a broad menu of opportunities that as a mentor you can offer your mentee. And I think that for me, the realization that it's building a relationship with them so they begin to trust and respect you, that's far more important than the content or feeling that you have to deliver things to them.
Yeah, I think that's huge. So there's a few questions that have come in. And one is holding the floor, but we'll make one wait a little bit longer. This is from Trent Frederick, all the way from Florida. Trent, I hope you're well. He says, what are your top 3 book recommendations for coach development?
Okay, top 3. So I've just finished reading John O'Sullivan's book, Every Moment Matters, and I really like that. It's a really, really well written book. There's so many messages in there which I agree with. What is your purpose as a coach? Why do you coach? Is all about the relationships. I wouldn't say that I have a philosophy as a coach. I kind of think about it in terms of what is my purpose and what is my approach. And I think my purpose is, can I help the people that I'm coaching become better people? And I have a little saying that if you coach the person, the player looks after themselves. And I think that kind of resonates with John's book. There's a couple of more academic books that have come out recently. So Brian Geraghty and Bettina Callery from the United States Center for Coaching, or I think it's kind of linked in with the United States Center for Coaching Excellence. They've just done a book on coach developers. And then And then, you know, I might go a bit left field. So I've just read a book called Evidence-Informed Learning Design by Paul Kirshner and I think it's Margaret Neelan, but it's all about evidence-based learning. How do people learn? And what evidence do we have? Rigorous scientific evidence to support various theories about learning. So they're very kind of like dismissive of learning styles, growth mindset, stuff like this. And actually they're quite supportive of instruction, not instruction in terms of lecturing people, but just good quality teaching. So it's just demystifying some of the myths, I guess, about how we go about designing learning and how we go about supporting learning.
Yeah,
Which effectively is what we do as coach developers, isn't it? That's what we do. We support learning.
Absolutely.
So,
is it Dr. Dick Bailey that talks about
Richard Bailey? Yeah.
Richard Bailey, right? Yeah. Learning styles, stuff like that. So
he doesn't like those.
Yes.
He presented at the Open University a couple of years ago, and he did his talk about all the myths around learning and stuff like this. He gets quite passionate about it.
He does indeed, and I love the fact that I think his tagline was "Children are not mini adults," right?
That's right. Exactly.
So this is a question from Deborah that's come in. Deborah is a retired PE teacher, and her question is now that we're going through a crisis around the world, coronavirus, how can coaches and clubs and club directors continue providing resources to use at home? And if you want to hit a few of these, Alex, and we'd already spoke about this.
Sure. It's about content, isn't it? What kind of content can you give your players? One thing I've done with my team at Portsmouth is use the website called Tifo that have some quite nice short animations, particularly the tactical ones. And I've just kind of given them through their parents, really, through our WhatsApp group, suggested little, some of these little videos that they can watch and think about the game tactically. It is just so difficult, isn't it? What can they do at home? And I mean, here in the UK, all the schools finish tomorrow, and no one really knows when they're going to go back. So that we could be looking at, say, I don't know, 3 months of not being able to do much or go too far. So how can you get them thinking about the game? That would be one of the things that I might do. How can you do a little bit of home exercise? Our local sports centre where I'm a member, they emailed last night and they've arranged for all the members to have access to some virtual classes. So at 7:30 this morning, I did a virtual sort of yoga class, which was quite interesting. It was quite good, to be fair. I quite enjoyed it. So maybe things like that people can do, and I think maybe more people are going to have to kind of do that to stay active and to maintain their health, as it were. So I guess we're all going to come up with ideas, aren't we? And in terms of where you are, pay-to-play model, perhaps there's a little bit more focus on it than what we have in this country, where grassroots soccer is, voluntary and it's not such an expense for the parents in many ways.
So just to add on to that, we've there's little videos, there's little content that's going out from Rush National, from local. There's videos. The question to add on to that, Deborah, is what do children want in these times? Because the schools are asking them to do online stuff. The parents are getting inundated with work stuff, and I think sometimes it's some of the experts are saying don't limit screen time, don't do this in these times. And for me, I think it's Christmas in March, basically, and just or it could be the summer holidays in March. But just making sure children are getting the opportunity to do some stuff, but also there's some content, like Alex said, that is good. And there's a bunch of little videos and challenges and things like that.
And I suppose it's also thinking, one of the things I struggled with going from from Chichester, where I was at the university on campus more or less every day, to effectively being a home worker, is you need to get yourself into some kind of routine, some kind of structure, whatever that routine and structure looks like.
I think that's huge. you know. But I also think it's important that children get a little bit of time to enjoy that time off too.
Yep.
Do you know what I mean?
Because it's stressful for them, isn't it? You know, the kind of worry, stuff like that. So
yeah, you know, they're not used to having mum and dad home, right? Mum and dad worrying about where's the next mortgage check coming from. So the stress and the things we'll have to do for mental health and physical activity afterwards. But I think it's key what you said, Alex, the routine and the structure. But I think exercise is proven to help reduce or, you know, reduce stress and mental health issues. So just getting the kids out there just to get their activity, but of course practice social distancing, not like the children in Florida and stuff like that. So we've got a couple of things from one Gonzalez Mendia, and he says, what is your best coach developer questions? What are your best coach developer questions?
Yeah, okay, my best coach developer questions that I might ask the coaches that I'm working with. So the first thing is, actually, you could say, well, why are you doing this? But there's a problem when you kind of start a question with why, because maybe the coach then gets on the defensive straight away, as though you kind of like, you know, they feel as though you're just, you know, going to be probing them a little bit sort of critically. So I sometimes, when I'm talking to a coach, I'll say, have you thought about doing this in this way? Or I was really interested in that. Just tell me what your thinking was behind that practice. What were your thoughts there? What were you hoping to try and achieve in that respect? So I'm trying to draw out their thinking, the reasons why they're doing what they're doing, without being too direct and saying, why did you do that? You know, so it comes across a little bit negatively. So I think there's a real skill to asking questions. And what I like to try and do from a coach development point of view is tease out why they're doing what they're doing, the what, the why, and the how. And once you've kind of got them opening up a little bit, then I think you can get into that kind of conversation. I mean, I think as coach developers, there's a debate to be had about whether we provide coaches with feedback or whether in fact we engage in a constructive conversation with coaches. I think I'm certainly moving more to the latter. It's about having a constructive conversation with a coach as opposed to giving them feedback on their session. So
yeah,
and watch and observe. The other thing that I've learned is, you know, being a tutor, we often have a checklist of things that we're looking for. And when you have a checklist, your kind of observation is geared to what's on the checklist. So, you know, you're looking for what the checklist is telling you to look for. Sometimes now I just go and watch. I don't have a checklist or anything like that. I just go and watch, and I find that I notice things that I might not notice otherwise. And some of those things are quite interesting to pick up on and have a conversation about.
Can you give us an example of some of the stuff you're noticing, Alex?
Yeah, so if I don't have when you have a checklist, you're focusing on the coach, aren't you? Because you're trying to see what they're doing. But when you don't have a checklist, I've now got into the habit of not watching the coach, but looking at what the players are doing. Because if you watch what the players are doing, that can tell you a lot about what the coach is like than just watching the coach. So are the players engaged? What's their behaviors like? You know, when the coach tells them to go and do something, how do they go and do that? What does that tell you about the general kind of environment that the coach is creating? And I find watching and observing and noticing what the players are doing and how they're behaving can give you a really good idea about the environment. Because if you're watching the coach, you probably know that the coach is putting on a performance for you, but the players probably aren't to a lesser extent. You know, they're doing what they kind of normally would do. So I think it gives you a slightly different insight into what happens when you might not be there. You know, how does the coach divide up the group? You know, who does he put with who? Is that a dynamic that's working or what have you? Who's getting the lion's share of the coach's attention? Why is that? You know, is that because that's a disruptive individual? Is that they're marginalizing the quieter, shyer person who's kind of not getting the time and the input from the coach that they might want, or they're just kind of being left to their own devices?
Are the same players answering the questions? Or
Exactly.
is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who's on the inside of the circle dominating things, and who's on the outside kind of not contributing and not engaging. And
Yeah.
so, you know, I must admit, I particularly when I'm working with a new coach, I might spend quite a lot of time just watching the players and their behaviors and getting a feel for them. And what's that telling me about the environment that's the coach is creating?
Yeah, I did a school visit the other day, and I laid out. So basically, what I started about 4 years ago was 55 elementary schools in Virginia Beach, kindergarten through 5th grade, and I challenged, can you be ingrained in the community? So we take over the PE class and we teach football. We teach football through the PE classes, and we go through all the grades, and we try and use positive discipline. So we would praise the behaviors we wanted. So I'd go in, I'd use a little bit of Mark Bennett's work, right? What's acceptable, what's unacceptable, and what's exceptional. And then we'd do the outline. I'd go along. You know, Mark and Stuart have actually been guests on the webinar, on our webinar too. And anyway, so I go on and I outline the things, and we're just getting the kids' movement right and moving. And every child does not followed my directions but didn't comprehend everything. So the teacher was getting annoyed, and I'm like, you know, Mr. Hill, you know, don't blame the kids. Listen, there's 100 kids out here, and every kid has done what I've asked them to do, for example. So therefore, it must have been my explanation. It was not clear enough. He goes, well, I understood it. I said, yeah, but look, there's 100 of them. You understood it. The staff understood it, but they didn't. So it's my explanation. And he's like, you know what? I never looked at things that way. So it's important, right? So just noticing, and then I think listening to some degree as well, right? Just listening, is huge. So one goes to add on. He says, you know, how do you make people feel comfortable during these conversations? So when you're doing your coach developer stuff, you know, what are some of the things? And obviously, I think you answered that a little bit already. Relationship, but then asking the question so they're not getting defensive, and considering
I think it comes down to how well you build the relationship, and that's right from the outset of the relationship. So what I do now is on the FA's mentoring program, when I have a new coach that asks for you know, to be part of the mentoring program, I'll deliberately, the first meeting that we have, meet away from where they're coaching. We might go to a local coffee shop or a local hotel, just sit down. We'll have a very general conversation about what the mentoring program involves, what's my role, and then I try and kind of steer the conversation around to, you know, what do they do? What's their job? You know, why are they coaching? Invariably, it might be because their son or daughter's involved in the team. And then I kind of try and find a point of connection. You know, that might be we support the same team, or we know some of a person. So you're just trying to get to know them at a personal level. So before we do anything about, you know, developing their coaching, you're trying to establish that connection straight away. And then if they're comfortable with you, then I think you can get into these kind of conversations. The one thing which we had a FA coach mentors conference, I think it was 3 years ago now, and I went to one of the seminars which was delivered by 2 policemen, and they were both from Manchester, and they worked in the crisis unit. So these are the policemen that will go out if someone's standing on top of a car park or whatever and kind of threatening to throw themselves off of it. And what stuck with me was that you don't talk these people down, you listen them down. So the idea is that rather than going up there and saying, look, you know, don't be silly, come on down, that's not going to work. You've got to sort of listen. Why are they there? You've got to begin to empathize with their situation and see it from their point of view. And then you'll build the trust and the rapport, and then you can begin to have the influence which might make them step back from what it is they're going to do. So it's actually called the behavioral change stairway model, and we put it in the course, and it actually does come out from crisis negotiation situations, the way in which you try and negotiate with hostage takers or whatever it might be. But for me, that kind of really stuck with me, really resonated me with a method by which you kind of work with coaches, that you, first of all, you've got to listen to them, understand them, get to know them as people, empathize with their situation. You know, that remember, they might be a novice coach, they might just literally have done their level 1, whereas you're a highly experienced coach. You've got to be aware of the power dynamic. You know, I'm there with an FA top with the 3 lions. I mean, that kind of immediately creates a dynamic in terms of their perception of what that badge means. And if you can kind of build that rapport, build that trust, build that respect, then I think you have the basis on which you can influence and change behavior. And whatever you say to them, whatever suggestions you make, they might be more receptive to it than if you just kind of barrel in there and say, well, look, you know, I don't think you could be doing that. You've got the kids lined up. So for example, quite often when I go and see a coach, you know, you do see children lined up in lines, and it's like you want to go in and say, don't do that.
Yeah.
But it's not the point. It's not the time. You know, maybe once you build a relationship and you say, like, you know, why do we ever think about doing this differently to having every child lined up behind each other? Why do we kind of like just do some 1v1 games here? And, you know, maybe they've got to kind of like dribble through a gate before they can put the ball into the goal, if you know, if that's the kind of outcome that you want to focus on, or whatever it might be. But I mean, Stuart features on the course, and it's one of the things that he says in one of the little videos that he's done is about it's knowing not to step in too soon and correct someone. It's finding the right time, the opportune moment where you've built that relationship to when they might say, okay, yeah, I'll have a go at that. So as a case, I've been working with a coach this year. We first met back in September. So what's that? That's the best part of 8 months ago now. Inexperienced coach, well-meaning dad, just done his level 1. His son plays on the team. His son's probably the best player. You know, I've kind of first meeting was in a local hotel on a Friday evening, just got to know each other. He's come down to see me coach and watch me coach, and we've kind of had a conversation about that. And then I went to watch him coach on a Saturday morning, and we had lots of kids with a ball dribbling in and out of cones and then back in a line. And that was October, end of October time. But it's only been January, so the first part of this year, where I've gone, now, Phil, what about if we did this instead of this? And he's gone, okay, yeah, no, happy to try that. Go on then, off you go. And he's kind of, yeah, that's really worked. Like, you know, everyone was engaged and focused, and so you've got their buy-in. But that's taken, you know, maybe took 5 months, let's say, to get to that point where, you know, you feel as though you could suggest something to him, let him have a go with it, explore it, and then, you know, because you've built that relationship and it worked, it just kind of reinforced the point.
Yeah, and I think it's huge, right? I mean, you've mentioned relationships. We've talked about just getting to know people, cultivating trust, rapport, you know, empathy, right? Empathy, it is our core value this month, actually. Empathy is our core value this month.
Yep.
Yeah. So along with safety, which is going on as well.
Right.
But just really emphasizing those things, and you know, the fact that Johnny O'Sullivan's book, who's also been a guest on our webinar, Alex.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't know John, I'll introduce you to him as well.
Okay.
Via email. But just the fact, you know, better people, and I just think that relationship, and it can be so undervalued, right? And especially now in these times, we're going to have to work really hard to cultivate and redevelop those relationships as we know them. One makes a statement here. He says, no one wakes up in the morning and goes, oh, I can't wait to queue up for my turn today. But you know, just think of that in real life now, people queuing in grocery stores and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Nobody's like, oh, great, I can't wait to queue. So coaches, listen to that.
Mm.
This is a question from Liam Lacey from Scotland, all the way in Chicago. He says, one of the videos within the course references just-in-time learning. From a teaching background,
Okay.
how would you apply this concept practically to coaching?
Oh. So yeah, so we use that in I think it was session 8, or maybe it was one of the other sessions on teaching, just-in-time learning. So what do people need to learn now? You know, so rather than having a curriculum, what is it that people need to focus on at this moment in time? So, I mean, I think there's lots of arguments or lots of debate to be had about whether you should have quite a structured linear curriculum, or maybe have some kind of approach to how you organize and structure your learning and development. So this is probably not a great answer to the question, but it's thinking about, yeah, what does this coach need at this point in time? What would give you the best return, or the best return for the coach in terms of their learning, rather than having kind of like a preset curriculum that you're going to work through. And that's something which I'm quite passionate about in a way. I wrote a paper with a colleague of mine which got published in UK Coaching's Applied Research Journal just before Christmas, and we're trying to argue that coach or governing bodies, let's say, or sports organizations should move away from a traditional approach to coach education, that like you go on a course of 5 days and there's a curriculum there. And with the kind of technology that we have now, could we move to a situation where a coach kind of like curates their own learning based on the context in which they're working? So there might be, for example, a core or a couple of core workshops that coaches need to do, which would be the mandatory part of their learning and development. But they could then go away and do other seminars, other workshops, webinars. They could kind of benefit from the learning of their peers and their colleagues locally, and they build their own curriculum. They build their own learning program. And at some point when they feel comfortable, they might be assessed. So assessment is detached from any kind of formal curriculum. So if you imagine, if you maybe studying for B license or an A license, it's probably been organized on a fairly traditional formal course-like basis where the assessment is integrated into it. So what we said is, well, first of all, separate the assessment from the course, and maybe think about actually how do people learn and the different kinds of opportunities and experiences that people learn from. And so coming back to the question, that's a bit like the just-in-time learning. What do I need to know now in order to be able to achieve this? YouTube's a good example of that, isn't it? Because and this is a point that Paul Kirshner makes regularly. Google is great for some things, but it's not good for other things. Like if you want to learn how to wire a plug, you can go and find probably 1,000 videos on YouTube that will tell you how to wire a plug. If you want to solve a problem, Google's not going to help you solve a complex problem. So some things are good for some types of learning, and other things are good for different types of learning. And so it's what do I, if I need to learn how to wire a plug at this moment, then probably Google is where I'll get it from. If I need to work out how I deal with this difficult player because they have kind of some behavioral issues, Google's probably not going to help me with that, but I may need to go to somewhere else for that. So I just think we need to think now about how we organize coach learning and development and do it in a different way. And there are some governing bodies in England like hockey and badminton that are taking that approach. So hockey have their kind of menu approach now, where as a coach you can choose from a menu of different activities and, like I say, piece together your own meal, which is the same as curating your own learning program.
Yeah, and Liam says he appreciates your answers and he loves that.
I hope that's helped, Liam.
No, he said he did, and he says maybe that could be your next project, Alex.
Yeah, I think I'd love to be involved in what I really enjoy doing is designing learning. I've kind of realized now, particularly over the last sort of 4 or 5 years, that's what I really enjoy doing, designing learning, designing programs and thinking about the connection. So if I was in charge of coach education for some organization, I'd probably maybe do things quite differently to the way that they've traditionally been done.
So
I know
give us,
I've had some,
what things would you do differently, Al?
I've had some conversations with colleagues at the FA, and I've said, look, rather than running the level 1 as this kind of 4-day course, or the level 2 as a 4-day course, why do we just have, let's say at level 1, why don't we just have a 1-day course which focuses on how we play? So that's the principles of the game. Don't worry about how you're going to deliver it. Don't worry about the pedagogical aspects. Let's just have a day where we really help the coaches focus on, this is a game of football. What does a game of football look like? What are the two teams trying to do? And what are some of the principles in terms of the decisions and what have you that players need to make in the game of football? So that might be a 1-day workshop. And that's a compulsory part of your learning. There's another 1-day workshop which links to the England DNA, which is about how we coach. Right. Let's not talk about technical, tactical. Let's just talk about different approaches to practice design, session design. So this is about the pedagogical aspects of your coaching. How are you going to deliver it? How are you going to deliver the information, the knowledge that you have about the game? So this is where we would go into looking at different types of practice design, constraints-based learning, and so forth, teaching games for understanding. Right. So there's your other kind of core module, core workshop. The challenge for the coaches then is, so we've given you some knowledge about the game, how we play. We've given you some knowledge about how you can deliver the knowledge that you have, the professional knowledge that you have, and so forth. You're now responsible for going away, putting some of that into action, learning from experience, talk to other coaches, listen to some podcasts, go on some seminars, go on some webinars. Think about what kind of support do you need for the context in which you're coaching. That might be 5 to 8 year olds, it might be teenagers, it could be semi-pro footballers, it could be mixed football, it could be disability football. And what a governing body can do is that they can start to put on specialist workshops for these different contexts. And over a period of 6 months, you might build a learning program which helps you to support the players that you're working with. And then you reach a point and you say, I think I'm now ready to be assessed to get my, I wouldn't necessarily call it level 1. I'd move away from numbers and I would just maybe kind of like use introduction to coaching qualification or something like that, or introduction to coaching football or introductory coaching award. And great, done that. Right, now move on to the kind of next level,
step,
as it were.
yeah.
Next step. So you would then do a 2-day workshop on how we play and a 2-day workshop on how we coach, and those are your golden threads through your structure. So by the time you get to the A license, you might end up doing a 4-day course on how we play, which is really getting involved in the technical and tactical detail of the game. And you might equally do a 4-day workshop on how we coach, which is really getting into the nitty gritty of building relationships with your players and different approaches to coaching and different types of sessions. And so you've got a golden thread all the way through from the bottom to the top.
Brilliant, which I think is so often missing, right? And I know, like you said, England hockey have got their golden thread, and they're working towards that.
Right.
Here, I don't know whether you know how much you know about Rush, Alex, but we're in 33 states with 40 clubs, and we're in 30 countries as well, and we have a Rush way to play. But what's really missing is, I won't call it the golden thread, I'll call it the blue thread, right? The blue thread of what unites us all the way through, which is quite a big task when you think about clubs, playing styles, identities. Teams within the same club in a local town play differently. So just thinking of the magnitude of that. So this will take a couple more questions, but this is from Julian Coropolese. Julian, sorry if I butchered your name. It says, what inspires you from coaching, Alex?
What
Or we could even
inspires
put from coach
coaching?
developing, or
Yeah.
coaching in general.
So from a coaching point of view, what really inspires me is I think it's the intellectual challenge, if I can put it that way. I spend hours thinking about how I can help my players become, not just better players, but better people. How can I really design sessions which help them and meets their kind of objectives, both at a team level and an individual level. So, I find coaching intellectually stimulating, and that kind of fires my passion and fires my interest, because we're never. I read something about Bielsa, and that he's a perfectionist. He always wants to play the perfect game, but he knows you'll never play the perfect game, and he tortures himself because he knows he can never reach a point of perfection. And I kind of really, that really resonated with me, because I want my team to play a perfect game of football, but I know they'll never achieve that perfect state, and that kind of tortures me and frustrates me in a way. So definitely from the coaching point of view, it's about helping the players that I coach become better players, but nicer people as well, people that I can be proud of and want to be associated with. And I've been really fortunate that over the years, I've worked with some really good people that I'm still in touch with. And if I ever bump into them, we'll still have a really good conversation. From a coach development point of view, it's similar. It's helping someone become a better coach so that they can coach the players that they're coaching better. So yeah, it's, if I can be helpful, if I can help someone become, a better coach and perhaps a better person as a consequence of that, if I can help them see things differently and raise their level of awareness about what they're doing, then I feel that's a job well done.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, you've said it quite a few times this webinar, better people, better people, better people. And I think it was James Kerr's book, Legacy, that says better people make better All Blacks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's right.
This is a question from Evan Pashunko, and he says, do you find your job stressful?
No.
Yeah.
No. The time when I have found coaching stressful is when I was managing managing this semi-pro team, and that was more about the kind of politics of the club and dealing with things which weren't necessarily associated with what was happening on the pitch. And that kind of stuff was stressful, but the actual sort of working with the players, designing sessions, helping people, I just look forward to that. I look forward to training. I don't find it stressful. Even if things.
I was going to say, what if you planned and developed this session and you've thought about the needs of the individual and the team, but it's just not coming out.
So I've learned to just accept that happens sometimes, and you've got to go with it and then reflect on it. In fact, that happened to me about 4 weeks ago. Did a session and it didn't really go the way that I wanted, but I've kind of had enough experience that, okay, let's just kind of move this on. Let's go into a game or something else, and I think, why didn't that kind of work in the way that I wanted it to work? Then when you do something and you sit down, I still draw out my sessions with pen and paper. I just like doodling and draw it out. So when you come up with something and it really works and you can see it's achieving what it is you want it to achieve, I just get a real buzz from that. And I think we all do, probably, don't we?
Absolutely.
The adrenaline kicks in, and
Eureka moments, right?
Exactly.
Moments, as it were.
That really works.
This is a question from Trent, and he said, what is the best advice you can give to mentors going into a new mentee relationship?
So the best advice I can give to take time to get to know your mentee, the person you're working with. Don't be too eager to step in and give advice and tell them what to do. Be very open and offer them the range of things that you can do. So don't say, you know, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, but you know, what help do they want from you? You know, it's for their benefit. So what can you do to help them?
Yeah.
And that would be my starting point. Just meet somewhere quiet, have a coffee, sit down, get to know them, find out a little bit about them, and then, you know, ask them, you know, how can I help you become a better coach? Is that what you want? And once you've got an idea as to what they want, then you can start to build out your program and come up with a bit of strategy in terms of how you're going to do that.
Yeah, I think that's super good advice. And then we'll take this as the final question, and this is from Neil McNabb from Georgia. So Neil, thanks for joining us. He says, who do you look up to, Alex? Who is your mentor? Or
So,
give us a couple along the way.
Good question, right? A couple of okay, so people that I look back now, that I've looked up on as mentors was, to be fair, you know, when I was out in the States back in the late 80s, early 90s, I thought Gary was a real mentor just in terms of his approach. He's a real educationalist, and takes a very kind of considered, deeply thinking approach to coaching and player development. Then I worked with a guy called Jim Kelman, and Jim's enthusiasm, his passion, and the way that he used to come up with practices which you think, oh, I just absolutely love playing in that practice. So he was another mentor. And then I suppose, yeah, so those two people definitely had an impact.
Would you say that Alf indirectly?
Yeah, indirectly, you know, someone was definitely, Alf was definitely someone who I kind of respected and thought a lot about. I'd say at the moment, like, Sean is a bit of a mentor in a way. I certainly respect him, and really appreciate kind of the way he looks at the game and looks at it in a different way. So I really enjoy that. I think that's been really beneficial. I mean, I think for me, for a long time, having that group of friends around me in Chichester, we almost co-mentored each other. It's almost like a co-creation of knowledge and understanding. We were sort of mentoring and mentored by each other, as it were. I mean, that was a stage that it kind of got to. And then I suppose in terms of, football-wise, I don't know these people, but I'm fascinated by, like, Bielsa and his approach to the game. He seems to have had an influence over a lot of coaches. I was up actually in Bishop Auckland a few weeks ago, so not too far away from Middlesbrough, and Leeds were actually playing Middlesbrough at Middlesbrough that night, and I was like, I wonder if I can get from Bishop Auckland to Middlesbrough to go and see the game. But you couldn't get tickets. You couldn't just sort of turn up on the night and get tickets, so I had to shelve that idea. Yeah, so I think definitely people that I've looked up to and respected and value their time and their insight, and how they've shaped my learning and my development.
So it's not Mourinho after you analyse the games at Spurs.
Do you know what? I think it's been brilliant watching Spurs for the last 3 years. Culminated in getting through to the Champions League final and seeing that team and the way they play. And there was a stage actually, probably this time last year, when I went to a few of the games, and even at that point they weren't playing particularly well, certainly in the Premier League, and you felt things were changing a little bit. I think the next couple of years are going to be really fascinating at Spurs to see which way Mourinho takes them. I think it's probably his biggest managerial challenge, because he's not going to get a lot of money. He's going to be constrained in that way. And I think the game is changing, and is he going to change in terms of his own tactical approach, the way he works with the players?
People management, right?
People management, exactly. Yeah. So I'm, okay, we might not get to the same level of success as we've had in the past, but I think watching Spurs, for me, is now entering a different phase, which from a coaching point of view is equally going to be as fascinating to see what he does and how he does it.
Yeah.
and how he builds that team, and the management around it. I mean, you'll never get the full story because you're not there, you're not at the club. You only kind of get the mediated view of it, don't you? But
I think there's only a couple of things it's worse than being a Spurs fan at current. I think that's being a Villa fan. And I'm a Villa fan, born and raised. So this is we'll take this as the final question, Alex, and then we'll wrap up, because I want to be sensitive to your time, and maybe we'll just come back on and do a part 2. But this question is from Jim Leon, and he says, do you provide your mentees a personal development plan form? And if so, what do you include?
Okay, so I don't. And the reason for that is that I want to try and make my relationship with my mentees as informal and organic as possible. And I think when we get into the idea of development plans, it all becomes a little bit too formalized and structured. Also, the mentees that I'm working with, they're volunteers, they're volunteer parents. It's not a profession, it's not their job. So I'm kind of like quite sensitive to not making this a structured, formal relationship. I want it to be quite organic and informal. I want our conversations to be like the kind of conversation we're having at the moment. I don't want to be having a conversation which is structured by an objective and a time frame and how we're going to evaluate that. Are we going to go green, amber, red and stuff like this? So, the FA do provide us with some examples of action plans and things like that, but I've kind of moved away from that, and it's just a very free-flowing, organic, informal kind of approach. My sense is that the mentees prefer that, particularly given their background and what have you. I think for some of them, they probably get enough performance appraisals and formalized learning plans and stuff like that in their jobs. So probably the last thing they want is for me to come along and say, right, here's our learning plan, and this is how we're going to measure it. And in 3 months' time, we're going to assess how much progress you've made. Yeah. If that was done to me, it would be a turn off. And I actually think that that's one of the issues about having formal mentoring programs. Is it really mentoring? Mentoring for me is quite an informal process. If you ask me, like the question you asked me a few minutes ago, who are my mentors? That was all like only an informal space. So I think if we want to do something which is quite formalized, where we're trying to measure learning and have plans, I don't think necessarily the word mentor is the right word to use in that respect. It's more like a coach educator.
Yeah.
Coach developer.
I think that's very fair. So Alex, listen, we want to be sensitive of your time. We've been going on for over an hour, but thank you for joining us. I think there's another question that's come in. It may be, it was a statement. Mr. Leon says, thank you for asking the question and thank you for the feedback. How can people get a hold of you? How can people follow you on Twitter? Before you answer that, I'll let people know, if you email me directly, I put it in the chat, I will send you the link to the course that Alex was involved heavily in developing. But Alex, how can people get a hold of you?
So you can contact me at the OU, which is alex.twitchin@open.ac.uk. I do have a Twitter account, which is mostly sort of retweets in a sense, but people can reach me. I'm at Intelligent Coach. So yeah.
We've got one last comment, and this guy, he says, thanks guys, really enjoyed the organic discussion. Play up Pompey. And that's from Neil, who's he played for City as a boy, and his dad played for City as well. But anyway, Alex, thanks a lot. I think if you're agreeable, we'd love to get you on for a second one. Maybe we can we'll get the course out, and maybe then we can do it around the course where people can give feedback on their experiences of the course and stuff like that. So but Alex, thanks for joining us today. Thanks for being part of my journey. Everybody, thanks for joining us as well. April 2nd is our next webinar with Orb Watts, where we're looking at internal and external cues. And then, we'll probably get Alex back on again to discuss the course. And everybody stay safe in these uncertain times. Be well and develop those relationships online, offline, any way you can, and keep going. So, Alex, any final
Thanks,
words?
No, just you know, like you say, stay safe and you know, keep well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks,
See
Chris.
you.
Bye
Bye.
now.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining us.